everybody, I'm Rebecca Coles, and this is Rebecca's Garden on DVD. We've put together some of the best stories that we've had over the years to bring you this collection of getting started in your garden. Hopefully it's going to help you and inspire you, and you'll enjoy getting those hands dirty. And if you like this DVD, you'll like the others that we have in the collection as well, including one on roses, flowers, gardening in the summer, gardening in the fall, and look for our holiday edition. Hope you enjoy the show, and until next time, keep those hands dirty.
The goal for most gardeners is to have flower beds bursting with blooms throughout the summer. But as the temperatures rise into the high 80s and 90s, the summer heat can take its toll on your plants. Too much sun and not enough rain can be the recipe for disaster. The key to preventing your plants from withering with the weather starts with watering. This is definitely not the way to water your plants during the heat of the summer because, believe it or not, a lot of this water will evaporate before it actually gets to the plant's roots, not to mention the fungal diseases that your plant might pick up. The key is to get to the plant's base and water slowly. That way the water has a chance to absorb in the soil and get to the roots. The only problem is, who wants to sit around like this all day trying to water your plants? Well, here's the option. Get yourself a soaker hose. Simply weave this around the plants. The water slowly trickles out, it drains into the soil, and gets to the root of the problem. But it also accomplishes two things. You're going to save 60 to 70% on your water, not to mention that your plant's roots are going to grow deeply, protecting them from the summer sun. Now the big question is, how much water does your garden need? Well, here's a great tip. Simply dig a hole that's about 4 to 6 inches deep. Okay, now you want to take some of the soil from the bottom of the hole. If it feels moist, you know your garden's getting enough water. If it's dry, you need to water more. Now you may have to do this test a couple of times before you can figure out how often and how much water your garden really needs. One last thing on watering. Make sure you do it in the morning. That way you lose less to evaporation, plus you'll get your plant's roots hydrated and ready to beat the heat of the day. Mulching is a great way to keep the plants cool. Not only will the mulch help the soil retain water, but it also keeps the weeds out. A good layer of mulch should be about 2 to 4 inches thick, and any mulch will do. I prefer to use anything organic, that way in the fall I can turn it into the soil. Another great way for beating the heat in your garden is to select drought-tolerant plants. Some good ideas include yarrow, or if you're looking for a ground cover or a border, how about lamb's ear? And speaking of ground covers, there are numerous sedums that love the hot, dry conditions of summer. Purple coneflower, known as echinacea or gay feather, will sizzle with color under the heat of the sun. Plus, these perennials will give you added color late in the summer into the fall. Some other perennials that hold their own in the dog days of summer include daylilies, the bright and vibrant blanket flower, euphorbia, ornamental grasses, coreopsis, and the king of the prairie, black-eyed Susans. But when in doubt, you can never go wrong with planting species native in your area. Beautiful Santa Fe, New Mexico. Not exactly what you'd call the land of rich organic soil. No, this is the epitome of dry, desolate conditions. With only 8 to 12 inches of rainfall a year, gardening can be a challenge unless you know how to make every drop count. That's what xeriscaping is all about.
The word is not xeriscaping, which is the biggest misconception that people have about dry gardening. And it does not mean planting with gravel and railroad ties and few plants. You can really get a very lush look. But the idea is to garden smart.
Catherine Clemens knows exactly what it takes to garden smart in the desert. For 20 years, she's worked as a landscape architect in the Southwest, designing all kinds of xeriscape gardens. So how do you get started when you come to a client's house and design a garden for them?
Well, let's take this space, for example. When we came here, there was basically just dirt and the existing piñons that were here, which were a huge asset for us. And seeing that, what we did was we decided to break the garden down into smaller spaces, which we typically like to do. Spaces that feel a little bit more human in scale. And so we basically break it down into rooms. So we have sort of a living room area, dining room area, and so on here. And this area the client initially wanted to do a lawn in, and we tried to talk him out of that because we figured that a perennial garden like this would end up being more colorful for him and actually give him more than a lawn space would. And one of the things that we really try to focus on is the hardscape, creating a very sound structure in the garden. Then the plants are basically like icing on the cake. It doesn't rely just on the plant material.
What'd you use for the hardscape?
Well, we'll use walls. We use stone walls, fountains certainly. Coyote fencing here is very indigenous material that gives a lot of texture. We like to see garden ornament brought in. Again, that gives full year interest.
Now, having a good plan is the first step to xeriscaping. The next is choosing the right plants, plants that thrive in the hot, dry desert sun. So when it's time for planting, what plants would you recommend in a xeriscape garden?
Well, some of my favorites are in this bed here in front of us. I really love the catmint here. I love the lavender-colored blossoms. It blooms in the spring and then will bloom again in the fall if it's cut back. The centranthus here has gorgeous pink blossoms, and butterflies really love that.
This is Jupiter's beard.
Or Jupiter's beard, yes. In front we have a coreopsis. That variety is the moonbeam coreopsis, just a nice, light, lacy little thing. And you can see that these all knit together really nicely. They flow together, which I really try to do, make a nice tapestry of color in here.
Yeah, and it is. It feels so texturally pleasing. Now, I noticed this is in a raised bed. Was that the purpose for drainage, or was that just something to give some aesthetic beauty here?
Well, it helps us make a little bit of separation between the two rooms, as it were, here. The other thing, the reason that we like raised beds very much is that then we can fill those with soil that has been amended, and it usually has very good drainage, and the plants respond really well.
You amended this, but in the other parts of the yard, do you have to amend the soil well for these kinds of plants?
Definitely. We have very, very poor soil quality here, so we will usually bring in a truckload of some sort of compost material and then use granular fertilizer mixed in with that and till that in a couple of times. And that definitely makes a big difference.
So still the basic rules of planting apply. Amend the soils to make sure the plants get off to a good start.
Yes, very much so.
Next comes the water, what little there is, and that's the key to xeriscaping, getting the water to the root of the plants, which means no overhead sprinkling.
Well, one of the most important things that we do is use a drip irrigation system, and that puts water to each plant. And that's basically set up like this. You have a mainline tube that gets snaked around in the planting areas. We've popped in an emitter, and you run a little tube then to each plant. And that's very important so that you're not wasting water in the dirt in between the plants.
And it goes right to the root zone.
It goes right to the root zone. It's underneath the mulch. It's completely hidden.
Recycling bath water is another popular method of water conservation, especially during drought conditions. A sump pump and a hose will easily transport the water from the tub to the garden. And to keep the water from evaporating, mulching is a must in these dry conditions. Just because we talk about minimal water usage doesn't mean you can't have a beautiful water feature.
Exactly. Fountains are a very important part of our designs in most cases, and we really like to incorporate that because of the sound of the water. It cools the space down, it feels good, it sounds wonderful, and it actually helps humidify the air.
Another element in xeriscaping is limiting the amount of lawn, which is a water hog. Catherine says it's best to plant smaller sections of turf using drought-tolerant grasses.
Here in Santa Fe, if somebody wants a deep green lawn like we're used to in the rest of the country, a Kentucky bluegrass lawn, we try to substitute a fescue blend here, and that is more drought tolerant here. It uses a little bit less water, and if you need an area that's not really going to be played on, it's not a turf grass, but buffalo grass is a lighter green sort of lawn, and it works very well also.
So is xeriscaping a no-maintenance garden?
Definitely not. There's no garden that's really no maintenance unless it's just completely gravel or something. But I think it ends up being very little maintenance. I mean, there's flower deadheading, occasional fertilizing, and really they're pretty self-sufficient gardens.
It seems like just about anywhere you go in the country, you're bound to find someone suffering from a drought. And for a lot of people, that means sacrificing beautiful gardens. But that doesn't have to be the case, especially if you know which plants to grow. Well, here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, we found a nursery that specializes in drought-tolerant plants. Santa Fe, New Mexico is dry. It gets less than 12 inches of rain each year, which might be a hurdle for some of the gardening business, but for David Salmon and his wife Ava, owners of Santa Fe greenhouses in high country, it's pay dirt. They've learned to embrace Mother Nature's dry disposition by offering plants that thrive under the hot, dry desert sun while teaching homeowners the secrets behind water-wise gardening.
A big part of water-wise gardening is using plants that are adapted to tough, difficult garden conditions. And every region has its own peculiarities, has its own difficulties in climate and soil. And so plants that are water-wise are typically well adapted to other difficult conditions as well.
David took me on a tour through his test gardens to show me some of his favorite drought-tolerant plants. Now this is a nice one, the purple ice plant.
We use it a lot here because it blooms all summer, obviously takes extreme heat and sun, and makes a wonderful plant to underplant larger growers like the moonshine yarrow.
Russian sage has got to be one of my favorites. I have it, I never water, and it thrives beautifully.
It really is an easy to grow plant. It's very water-wise, a good deep soaking maybe every couple of weeks keeps it in bloom for months. It's got a very fragrant foliage and flower, which gives it good deer and rabbit resistance.
David says ornamental grasses are a great anchor for any water-wise garden. They're great for adding texture, height, and movement.
This is certainly one of my favorites. This is the Calamagrostis Carl Forrester. And again, I think this has gotten a watering maybe every other week. It comes into plume about midsummer, and then the plumes hold right through the winter, so it provides 3 seasons of interest. Pest-free, very easy to grow. One of my favorites.
And dry doesn't mean dingy. Many drought-tolerant plants explode with color. Some good choices include Fireworks Goldenrod, Blue Salvia pitcheri, or how about Salvia maraschino? Low growers like hardy plumbago will weave beautiful blooms through the garden. Now, many of these bright flowers will also attract bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds, especially this hummingbird trumpet with bright orange blooms, or the hummingbird mint with its wonderful fruity scent. And speaking of scent, so I followed my nose, which led me straight, of course, to the chocolate plant.
Yes, chocolate flower is one of our native wildflowers here in New Mexico. And of course, the fragrance is incredible, perfumes the entire garden.
Keeps the deer away.
Keeps the deer away, apparently, that chocolate scent. And even as the flowers begin to fold up in the afternoon heat, you still have the additional interest of the dried seed heads.
Oh, and I think they are just adorable. All of these plants are low maintenance. They grow best in desert climates, but David said they will grow in most parts of the country. He suggests using a drip irrigation system to direct the water right to the root zone. And he said don't forget to feed the plants. For this, he uses a special fertilizer. So once we've selected the correct plants, let's talk about the best way to care for them. And I see right now you've got this bag of Yum Yum Mix.
Yum Yum Mix is an organic formulation developed by a landscaper here in Santa Fe. And it's full of good organic ingredients that help feed the soil and nourish the plant roots.
So you put this in just before you plant?
Put it in when we plant, and then you could also top dress it with it and then scratch it into the surface of the soil.
Now what about mulching? I see you use a lot of gravel here.
Well, we use a variety of mulches here in the West because mulching is really a cornerstone to water-wise gardening. I like the chipped gravel mulch very much because it encourages a lot of the native plants to reseed.
And you want to put it down how thick?
You want to put it down a minimum of about 1 inch to 2 or 3 inches, depending on the size of the plant.
And once we've done all that, we're going to have a beautiful blooming garden, no matter whether it rains or not.
Rain or shine, the plants will be happy.
Good. If you're looking for plants to add to your outdoor summer garden, you may want to check out Caladium with this decorative foliage, and it does well in the shade, or how about the stately and elegant Calla Lily? Both of these plants are grown from summer bulbs, which means you have to wait until after the last frost before you plant them. Now the bulb is actually called a corm. It looks like this, kind of like a flattened tulip. Now when you buy your bulb, it's important that they're healthy. So put it in your hand, it should feel heavy, and make sure that there's no mold, any mushy spots. You don't want any deep nicks or scars. Now, once you get your bulbs, you'll notice that there's going to be a large eye in the center. This is going to be responsible for either a bloom on the calla lily or a small cluster of foliage for the caladium. Now, here's where the tip comes in. If we remove this central eye, it's going to send all its energy back down to these little eyes on the side. So instead of one bloom, we're going to get a bunch of blooms. Let me show you how it's done. Take a small knife, like a pocket knife or paring knife, and simply cut out the eye, almost as if you were cutting the eye out of a potato. Now, there's no reason you have to make a deep cut, and it's important that you let the cut dry out for about 24 hours before you plant, and just be sure to follow the directions when you do plant. And in no time, hopefully you'll have a bunch of blooms to enjoy. And keep in mind, this tip works best only with the caladium and the calla lilies. When we talk about planting bulbs, usually it's in the fall. However, there are some bulbs that you can plant late spring. They're called summer bulbs, and the exotic blooms they can add to your garden will give you fire and spark unlike anything you've seen before. In the dog days of summer, when a lot of plants are beaten down by the hot sun, we find these beauties just hitting their stride. It can be hard to choose between the beautiful dahlias, gladiolas, cannas, caladiums, and the tuberous begonias. But once you've figured out what you're going to plant, the rest is really a piece of cake. Although they're called summer bulbs, they're really broken into several different categories. For instance, we have what's called the rhizome. These are underground horizontal stems that produce the beautiful canna. Caladium and begonias come from what's called tubers. They kind of look like swollen smashed bulbs with roots. Then we have the tuberous root. From these we get the dahlias. And then there are the corms. They kind of look like a smashed bulb. These produce the glorious gladiolas. Now, it's important to know the category since the planting technique for each flower is different, especially with the dahlias. Now, what I've done for them is dug a hole that's about 6 inches deep. Now I'm going to make a mound in the center of the hole, and that's going to be about 2 inches tall. Now, before you plant the dahlia, it's important to inspect each tuber. If they're hanging by a thread like this one here, you have to remove it. Otherwise, when you plant this, it will rot and could affect the whole structure of the flower. So get out the pruners and remove any suspicious-looking roots. Then drape the roots over the mound in the hole. Okay, now once that's in place, it's time to stake the dahlia. It seems a little early, but we're going to do it now because we don't want to injure any of the tubers later as they begin to grow. So we'll put the stake in as close to the stem as possible, then we're ready to cover it up. Now I filled the hole halfway full. The next step is to take some bulb food, just sprinkle that over the top. This will give the bulb its little boost to get growing, and then we'll add another inch of soil around that. And in no time, these beauties will give you blooms sometimes the size of dinner plates. Now, if you prefer things on a smaller scale but still want to enjoy those hot, bold colors, how about growing caladiums for their vibrant foliage? Or begonias? These plants have provided generations with rich colors that look good enough to eat. Now, the biggest challenge you're going to have when it comes time to plant the tubers is trying to figure out which way you plant them. Well, with the caladium, it's easy. Just look for the flattened area. You want to make sure you put that down into the hole facing the soil. With the tuberous begonias, well, if they have the stems, you know you want to plant those facing up. Otherwise, just make sure the concave area is looking up at you when you plant them. In any case, both of these are buried 2 to 3 inches below the soil surface. And keep in mind, these tubers like the shade. Corms are planted just like you would the fall bulb. First of all, you want to find the points. Those go into the ground looking up at you. We'll plant these about 4 inches deep. And if you want a successive look of gladiolas, make sure you stagger the planting, which means every week plant a few more. As you see, glads can add a variety of color with great height to any garden. These slender beauties also make a great cut flower. Or how about bringing a little bit of the tropics into your backyard with cannas? And don't think their flowers are the only appeal. Their foliage can be just as stunning. Cannas are rhizomes, which leads us to the next category. Now, before you plant your rhizomes, it's important to inspect them carefully because sometimes you can't see the rot. But if you feel around and you feel a soft area like this right here, take a knife and just cut it off. Now, the rhizomes can be planted really any direction, but if there is a bend in the rhizome like this one here, make sure you have the points closest to the soil surface. When you plant them, the hole is going to be very shallow. In fact, I've dug it out. It's about 1.5 to 2 inches deep. Just place the rhizome in the hole, cover it up with soil, and then we're going to scratch in a little fertilizer to give it a boost. And then with all the bulbs, you want to make sure you keep them watered throughout the summer and make sure you scratch in a fertilizer once a month. And keep in mind, these are summer bulbs, which means they don't like the cold weather. So come fall, when frost is in the air, you're going to have to dig these up, store them, and you can use them again next year.
Charleston, South Carolina, a city steeped in history dating back to the 1600s. Even today, pieces of the past mingle beautifully with the present. Streets are tightly lined with century-old homes stacked side by side, leaving hardly any room for a garden, or so it seems. Tucked behind the elegant iron gateways and the white column balconies are magnificent small space gardens. The best time to see these gardens in bloom is during the spring months. Many are part of the Festival of Homes and Gardens tour sponsored by the historic Charleston Foundation. Lucky me, our visit was during tour time.
So this is lovely.
My tour started in the formal garden of Diane Avalon. It's hard to imagine that before this garden took root, this space was a concrete parking lot. Determined, Diane enclosed the space with brick walls and began paving the lot with plants. The formal design, anchored with geometric shapes, is reminiscent of Charleston gardens during the 18th century.
What I love about this garden, it's only 30 feet by 30 feet, and I wish everybody in the world could actually be here to see this because it feels so much larger than it actually is.
Well, I think in a small space, it works very well to have a formal or structured garden because it actually, perversely enough, expands the space. You impose order and geometry upon it, and it leads your eye through the space.
Diane says that keeping the plant material in scale is also very important. She chose dwarf boxwood for the hedges, and to keep the structure of the garden from being cold and hard, she recommends taking advantage of the vertical space as well. Climbing roses and jasmine spill up over the walls, softening the design.
The other thing that I think helps in a small space and in a structured garden is to limit color and to limit plant material. Otherwise, you end up with such visual confusion. We've got pink and white, much more white than pink, and the plant material is very limited. We repeat it from place to place so that it also moves your eye around the garden.
From formal to casual, we went to see the most visited private garden in America, made famous in the book Mrs. Whaley and Her Charleston Garden. Emily Whaley was the original owner. Her daughter Marty now keeps the garden growing with her mother's spirit.
Now, your mother's style must have been unique to produce a garden like this.
I think so, and she was a pioneer in the gardening realm of Charleston.
How's her style different from other gardeners here in town?
I think it's loose. She was daring. She didn't get into a pattern. I remember seeing the most beautiful sight one spring, and she never repeated it again. She didn't rely on one success because she wanted to try so many things.
One of the things she tried that works so well in this small garden is the outdoor room concept. Living walls filled with azaleas, camellias, tea olive shrubs, and loquat help give the space a much larger and more welcoming feel.
So I would advise that you fill up the space and enclose it with the vertical things, and then get your decoration, like a beautiful feature and some water. Then use the space, live in it. If you take it so seriously, it'll be too cleaned up and sterile. And so we have a lot of her homemade signs around here, a place where she would sit to have her cocktails behind the azaleas.
And behind the azaleas.
Right.
Do you want the neighbors to see?
Oh, the neighbors probably were joining her.
The last stop on my garden tour took me to a side garden hidden behind this elegant Charleston home. Now, this is a perfect example of how one can utilize long, narrow spaces. The garden leads to a small, formal private retreat in the back. Owner Vereen Cohen and her husband Dick have maintained the garden for over 40 years now. Creating a focal point was the key design element in this tiny garden. It's a horseshoe bed filled with pansies and English daisies.
You have the brick pavers around here, covered with moss. A lot of people get very nervous and want to get rid of the moss, but it's so
That's
nice
right.
and delicate.
I have a neighbor who has hers taken off, but I have people come in here and say, how do you get it to grow? Well, we've left it like that because it grows naturally that way, and these bricks have been here since about 1954.
Besides brick, boxwood is once again used to outline this garden, giving it structure. The key with these shrubs or any plants in a small garden is to allow room for them to grow. And of course, perfect pruning is a must. Luckily, Verine's husband tackles that job.
Suddenly one year he realized that this side in the sun was much bigger than the side in the shade, and they weren't near as green. So he dug up all the balls on one side in the shade, brought them over to the sun, put the ones from the sun and put them in the shade. And they've been like that ever since.
I was going to say, please tell me he doesn't do this every other year.
One time.
But it worked.
These three small gardens certainly prove that bigger isn't always better in the garden.
I wonder what time it is. Oh, I forgot. Oh, it's 12 o'clock. Believe it or not, this is how they used to tell time 4,000 years ago. These are called sundials, and what's old is new again. In fact, sundials are now popping up in gardens all around the country.
Whether they're used for function or fashion, sundials take us back in time. These simple timepieces add a nostalgic look to any garden patio or sunroom.
Basically, there are two components to your sundial. You have the dial face, which is the plate, and then the shadow arm. This rises out of the center and at an angle. And it's this arm that captures the shadow of the sun to tell you what time it is. But in order for it to work, you have to position it correctly in your garden. And to do that, you can take a little compass, just put it on the plate, rotate the sundial until the shadow arm faces due north. Now, if you don't have a compass, you can simply use your watch. Just be sure to go out at high noon and set the dial up so that the pointer is right over the noon hour. Now, keep in mind, it depends on where you live, but time zones do vary, and you'll have to make some adjustments throughout the season to keep this fairly accurate.
Also remember that sundials work best when the dial face is mounted on a flat surface. If you prefer a more 3D look, these armillary sundials feature a circular faceplate that rotates. You can tell the time by looking at the numbers inside the circle.
Now, obviously, on a shady day, you're not going to be able to tell the time from these timepieces. And keep in mind, these are sun times, so they're not completely accurate. So I wouldn't trade in your timepiece just yet. Although they've been around for hundreds of years, now more than ever, sunflowers are making a comeback, and in a big way. They're a hot commodity, so hot that people are making a living at growing them. I'm at Tangerini Farms in Millis, Massachusetts, where they grow over 100,000 of these beauties every year. So what better place to show you how to plant them, grow them, and even harvest them? Sunflowers are an annual, which means they have to be planted every year. We're going to do that from seed. Before you get out there and start planting, make sure all threats of frost have gone, and also pick a sunny location with well-drained soil. Now, what I've done here is I've mixed in a well-balanced fertilizer that I picked up at the garden center. Typically, the ratio is about 1 cup per 10 feet. Just mix it into the soil. Then comes planting. Now, the seeds come in all shapes and sizes, but for this one here, we're going to plant this about 1.5 to 2 inches deep. So we're going to put that down there, cover it up, and then space them out about 1 foot or more apart from each other. They need space to grow. And if you want a continuous harvest, make sure every 2 weeks you come out and plant more seeds. That's about it. We're going to keep these watered, sit back, watch them grow. Let me show you the results. The beauty of sunflowers is that when freshly picked, they can look great in a bouquet, or they can be very dramatic all by themselves. You'll know it's prime picking time when the head of the flower just barely starts to open up, like this one here. You can see it's still very immature. The best time to come out and harvest is early in the morning, preferably on a cloudy day. This is when there's a lot of water in the flower. As far as cutting goes, make sure you use very clean pruning shears, and you want to leave at least 12 inches of stem. Now, it's best to cut at an angle. This way the flower can draw up more water. Then it's important to get them into water right away. And if you want them to last, put them in a vase, change the water at least every day, and these flowers will last for a couple of weeks. Now, if you're growing the flower for its seed, the rules are a little different. First of all, you can tell that the seed is beginning to mature. You can see the black and white stripes here. The best thing is to go ahead and leave the flower on the stalk, but then you're going to contend with the birds. So if you're going to leave it out, you're going to have to cover up the heads. Cheesecloth is excellent, or some kind of bag. Otherwise, what you can do is wait until 2/3 of the seed is mature, then bring out your pruners, cut down about 18 inches. We'll take it in to dry. Now, this is what the flowers look like after they've been drying a few weeks in a very airy location. You can see they're turning brown, which is good, but watch how easily the seeds come away from the head. So simply just rub them away and you've got your seeds. Now, I've been talking about one variety of sunflower here. There are many more I'd like you to see. Well, there she is, busy at work, Laura Tangerini, the woman that runs this farm here. First of all, your place is beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Did you ever imagine that growing sunflowers would be so lucrative?
We had no idea when we started. Actually, we started using it as a marketing tool to bring people into our farm stand, and it became one of our #1 cash crops.
So they really came in then.
They certainly did.
You know, most people think of the regular sunflower, the one we've been talking about today, but you've got many varieties. Let's talk about them.
Okay. This variety here is called Gold Burst. It grows about 8 feet tall, and it is a multi-branching sunflower, so it blooms most of the summer.
I love that one.
This is Floristan, a red sunflower, also multi-branching. This miniature is called Sonia. This is also a multi-branching sunflower. And this is Valentine. And all these sunflowers are very easy to grow at home.
Well, that's encouraging to me and hopefully for people at home. Keep in mind, sunflowers, very easy to grow. They're a lot of fun, and you know what? The kids will just love them. I've got a great gift idea. It's a wreath, and believe it or not, it's made out of a sunflower. First of all, here's what you need. A sunflower head. It's got to be fresh. You need a floral straw wreath, which you can pick up at a craft store. Don't forget your floral pins. You'll also need a glue gun and just dried flowers that will attach to the wreath. Let's get started. First of all, you want to attach the green head of the sunflower to the straw wreath. You can do that with the floral pins. You want to use at least a dozen of those. Just push that through the head, right into the wreath. That will help secure it. Then comes the fun part. We start getting creative. With the glue gun, we have added lemon leaves around the outside of the wreath. And we're just going to secure those with the glue and overlay them, as you can see we've done here. Then we've added some straw flower. This came right from our garden, so it looks very nice. Also tucked in some wheat and added some Milo. Now this is just the first step. Look what happens by the time we finished. We continued tucking in a little bit of cotton, some sunflowers, a little bit of wheat. Now doesn't that look nice? This is just one thing you can do. If this is a little too complicated or maybe a little extravagant, well, all you need to do then is just attach something to the top. We've added little red chilies, baby's breath, straw flower, a little raffia. Isn't that nice? If we add a loop, attach it to the tree, the birds will love it. I remember when I was a little girl picking vegetables for my mother to pickle. I remember how wonderful the kitchen smelled. I remember how hard she worked, and I also remember how long it took. Well, times have changed. Now pickling is easier than ever. In fact, get ready, pick your produce, because we're going to pickle. Ooh, this looks nice. When you think of pickling, you're probably thinking of cucumbers. However, Andrew Zimmern, a chef here at Cook's, is going to explain that any vegetable can be pickled.
That's right, Rebecca. And in fact, a lot of root vegetables and vegetables that are coming out of the garden right now that are growing above ground are perfectly appropriate for pickling. In fact, some people prefer them to the taste of pickled cucumbers. We're using some carrots, some asparagus, some baby beets, some green beans, some baby Kirby cukes, peppers, mushrooms, Brussels sprouts, anything coming out of the garden right now is appropriate for pickling.
Oh, it's going to be great. And so this is easy. This is an easy method.
I call it my easy pickling method. Grandma's technique sometimes took anywhere from 48 hours to 48 days. This can be accomplished in just a few moments.
All right, let's see how easy it is. Where do we start?
The first thing that we need to do is remember that this is a professional pickling process, so we've got to sterilize our jars. So I'm just going to pull these out of the boiling water here where they've been sitting for about 10 minutes. Making sure that we're observing proper pickling procedures. And of course, sterilize your lids for 10 minutes as well. The next step is preparing our vinegar solution. And we're using standard household white vinegar. We're using our pickling ratio of 1 cup of sugar to every quart of vinegar. Then we're going to add our pickling spices. So here I've got 4 quarts of vinegar coming to a boil. So I'm going to add 4 cups of sugar.
Great. Now we need to flavor the vinegar, and we're going to put together a little bag of goods here.
We're going to put our pickling spice, which is your standard supermarket pickling spice, right into a little cheesecloth bag. We're going to add a bud of star anise, which is very, very strong in flavor, so just 1.
Right.
And if we just tie that, we have a beautiful little sachet, and this prevents the little seeds from floating around in our pickling solution, disturbing the look of it, and also that way it won't get into Grandma's teeth.
That's not very pretty, is it? Okay, then drop that in.
Once the spices have been added, turn off the heat and let it steep for 30 minutes. Now we're ready for the secondary seasoning. Puts another layer of flavor into the pickle.
All right.
Our hot chilies, a clove of smashed garlic.
And it has to be smashed.
Yeah, that releases the essential oils inside the garlic.
Okay.
A little bit of fresh dill from the garden.
All righty.
Some beautiful flavor and color. And some fresh lemon rind, which I find really softens up that vinegar taste.
Okay. What's next?
Now we're ready to load and go.
Ooh, I like that.
Be sure to cut the vegetables to the size of the jar. And it's okay to mix harder root vegetables like carrots with the softer textured asparagus or beans. And most importantly,
make sure you eat as you go.
It's the best part.
Do we want to pack these in?
Yes, you do. You want to get them as tight as you can without ruining the vegetable, because you know, once they pickle, they are cooking and they will shrink.
Okay.
as you finish packing your vegetables, Andrew suggests giving the jar a little shake to fit in as much as possible. And don't forget to add some slices of red pepper for color and zip.
Okay, now we're done here.
We're ready to add our pickling solution.
Make sure the liquid is room temperature when you pour it into the jars. And if you pickle with beets, don't mix them with other vegetables because they'll turn purple.
So that liquid comes to a ½ inch of the top, and then you just tighten down the lids just until resistance is met. You want it firm, but of course, it's going to expand in the hot water. You don't want to blow a gasket.
So that's why we bring it ½ inch down.
Exactly.
Okay, now we give it a bath.
That's
in hot
it,
water.
into the water bath.
How long?
Carrots, other root vegetables, 5 to 7 minutes in the hot water. Soft vegetables like green beans, just 2 or 3 minutes. And if you're mixing and matching, try and go in between.
Oh, these turned out beautiful. A little hot to the touch, so we can't eat them now. How long do we have to wait?
Well, ideally, cool them at room temperature, 16 to 24 hours. That creates the vacuum seal that'll keep them shelf stable for a long, long time.
Great. And if you're going to make these as gifts, you can get a little creative, putting paper over the top, raffia, and these are adorable. And remember, when you open these up, you want to hear this.
The pop of freshness.
That means these are ready to be eaten. Well, after all our hard work in the spring, you can see it's paid off. The garden is up and growing. But this is no time to sit back and relax. Because if you want to be guaranteed a great harvest, you've got to stay on top of the garden with a maintenance plan. Rule number 1, keep the weeds out of the garden. They'll steal nutrients and water from your plants, so it's a big competition. But if you get them when they're young, it's very simple to just drag a hoe across the soil. You can literally skim them out. Remember, about 30 minutes a day will keep most weeds away. What the hoe doesn't get, your hands can. Now that we've got the weeding done, it's time to water. And if you really want to conserve on water, keep these things in mind. First of all, do it in the morning. That way it gets the plant hydrated so that it can take on the heat of the day. Plus, by doing it so early, you're not going to lose a lot to evaporation from all the wind. Also, if you can keep the water right at the plant's root zone, that too helps conserve water. Now, how often you water is up to your soil and where you live. It's a good idea every couple of days to come in, either dig a little hole or stick your finger in the ground. If it's dry, you water. To minimize both watering and weeding, it's important that you mulch. You can use just about anything. I'm using a coarse compost that's actually ground up peanut shells. This will decompose nicely in the soil while offering a little bit of nutrition. And it's important that you put a layer about 2 to 4 inches thick around the base of the plant. All right, that looks good. Now this layer will help retain moisture, it's going to keep the soil cool, and it's going to keep the weeds out. To a zoologist, these are elephant's ears. To a baker, these are elephant's ears. But to the gardener, These are the real elephant's ears, a great tropical plant that has these huge leathery leaves that are great for any backyard or patio. Elephant's ears are hardy in zones 9 and warmer, but can be grown just about anywhere during the summer months. The plant grows 3 to 5 feet tall and has oversized leaves that look great as a backdrop to any colorful flower bed and are perfect in a pot on a patio. Now, if you want to grow your own, this is what you need to look for. This is where the ears start. Looks like a huge bulb when in fact it's a tuber. Typically, garden centers have these available late winter, early spring, and that's an excellent time to get them started. What you want to do is look for a heavy bulb, and all of them are pretty big and heavy anyway, but make sure you examine the bulb and stay away from any of those that might have any mold or mushy spots. Then just take this home, it's ready to go. As far as planting goes, if you're going to put this outdoors, you need to wait till all threats of frost are gone. Otherwise, you can give it a jump start indoors by starting it in a pot, and that's what we're going to do. For starters, you need a pot, a large one, something at least 18 inches across and deep. Inside, I've added a nice potting soil, and if you're one that may skip on watering, you may want to go ahead and add some of these polymers. It's called soil moist. This helps retain water and will keep the bulbs hydrated. Now you got to remember, these bulbs are heavy feeders. They get hungry. So to help them out, I'm going to add a handful of an all-purpose 10-10-10 fertilizer and mix it into the soil before I plant them. Okay, we got that mix. Now we're ready to plant the bulbs. Now, which way is up? It's pretty easy. Just look for a point, and of course, if you see stringy things at the bottom, those are the roots. They want to go down, point looking up at you. As far as depth goes, you want to plant them 2 times their height. So this is going to go down about 8 inches. So start digging. We got a ways to go. Okay, now we're going to give them a good drink of water, and then we won't water at all until we see the sprouts. Once we have the sprouts, then you want to keep the soil relatively moist, because remember, these are tropicals and they are heavy feeders. So once they start sprouting, you can go ahead and feed them every couple of weeks with a water-soluble fertilizer that is reduced down or diluted down to half strength. In no time, this little pot will look like these big ears. You know, there's no reason you can't have a beautiful garden, even where the sun doesn't shine. Today, I'm going to give you my top 10 list of plants made for the shade. They're loaded with color and texture that are guaranteed to bring that shady spot alive. Impatiens are #1 on my top 10 list. If you want to cover some shady ground with vibrant color, this popular annual will always come to the rescue. Impatiens can be purchased as individual plants, or you can buy them in baskets. They come in a variety of different colors and really will brighten up any dark spot. They thrive in the shade. If, however, you have an area that gets a little more sunshine and you like this look, then you should test out the New Guinea Impatiens. This has darker green foliage, plus you get larger, brilliant blooms. Another annual that offers show-stopping color is the tuberous begonia. There are many different varieties and colors to choose from. It loves the shade but will tolerate about 6 hours of sun a day. It creates a dazzling display in containers, hanging baskets, even in the ground where it grows into a 12-inch mound. #3 on my list is fuchsia. Talk about beautiful blooms. They almost look fake. Fuchsia is great for a hanging basket on a shady deck. Now, if it's leaf color you're looking for, check out coleus. The foliage comes alive in the shade with all sorts of color and texture combinations, from deep purples and dark greens to golden yellows and chartreuse. Its paisley patterns are sure to please any gardener. When it comes to perennials in the shade garden, hosta is king. There are more varieties than you could ever imagine. It's easy to get hooked on hosta. You'll find all types of textures, colors, and sizes, from the dwarf to the giant. Whether lining a pathway or adding interest to a shady corner, there's definitely lots of hosta. And here's a great hosta tip. The more yellowish green the leaves are, the more sunshine the plant will tolerate. Darker bluish green leaves will do best in deeper shade. One of the first perennials to bloom in the shade garden is the delicate bleeding heart. This will thrive in the shade but can tolerate a little bit of sunshine, and it loves moist soil conditions. Bleeding hearts usually grow about 1 to 3 feet tall. Their blooms dangle from arched stems in both pink and white. The pink varieties are more common and usually more vigorous. Another blooming perennial, shade pick number 7, is a stilby. It produces soft, feathery plumes mid to late summer in shades of pink, white, and red. Now, as far as ground covers go, lily of the valley is a sure bet for the shade garden. It's a quick spreader. We're treated with delicate blooms in the spring, followed by tiny orange berries after the bloom. Ferns are fine for shady plant number 9. Once again, they're quick spreaders and great filler for deep shade. And finally, last but not least on my shady list is baby tears. This low-growing plant is very dense and looks like green carpet growing in the garden. So there you have it, my top 10 list of plants that shine in the shade. Now, to keep them looking good, be sure to water them and don't forget to feed them once a month. With your annuals, it's a good idea to deadhead them. That means remove the spent blooms after they've faded. That will keep them blooming all summer long. The splendor of Oregon's Cascade Mountains is something to behold. Towering mountain peaks, wild and rushing river valleys, and of course, majestic conifers as far as the eye can see. So it's no surprise that one of the finest conifer nurseries is located right here in Boring, Oregon, where they not only grow trees like that, but they can transform them into a sculptural masterpiece like this. At Isley Nursery, there seems to be no limit to what a pair of pruning shears and a whole lot of imagination can produce. The ideas just keep growing. The man behind this extraordinary nursery is Andre Isley, and I think, Andre, what we need to do first is define what a conifer is.
Rebecca, a conifer basically is a plant that bears cones.
Well, that's real simple. How and why would you encourage people to incorporate conifers in their landscape?
Oh, I have an insatiable appetite for conifers because of the low maintenance, the different color, the texture, everything else about them, and such low maintenance.
Well, low maintenance is key, I think, for anybody. What soil? They're not real picky?
Not really picky.
So you can grow them anywhere in the country?
Almost any geographical area of the country, right.
Well, and the texture is unbeatable.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we have some extraordinary textures here.
Dwarf conifers can be large, like this Sargent weeping hemlock, which makes a perfect privacy hedge, or small, like this motherlode, great to smother your weeds. And as for shapes, some, like this John's dilly, grow in a perfect conical form without pruning. Most people plant their conifers and let them grow as they naturally would. However, with a little artistic touch and some creativity, you can turn something like this into something like this beautiful spiral topiary. We're going to learn from the master here at Isley Nursery. His name is Randy Smith. He says this is fairly easy to do and that we can do it in 20 minutes. So start your clock. Okay, Randy, the clock is running. What do we need to know first?
Okay, well, we're going to make a spiral.
Okay.
So what you need to do is you need to look at your tree, and you need to see a spiral in the tree.
Oh, Randy, I don't see it.
Okay, well, what I often tell people is to take a piece of tape like this.
Okay.
It's just flagging ribbon, and tie it to the top of the tree.
All right. And why are we doing this?
Well, this is going to work as kind of a template for you. You're going to make kind of a candy cane stripe going down the tree.
All right.
And that'll help us make our first cut.
Oh, I get it. That's very smart. Okay, so now we have our template. I imagine we start cutting now.
Yes, now what I like to do is take the grass shear, just your standard grass shear.
Okay.
And you're going to come in and you're going to just kind of draw a line in the foliage.
But cut it out as you draw.
Yeah, well, you're cutting it out, and that's drawing your line.
And you stay above our marker or below?
Well,
now, don't hold out on information because yours can't look better than mine.
Oh, well, I don't think you have to worry about that. I'm sure you'll do fine. Either way, whatever, you're visualizing the spiral.
Okay, I'm visualizing.
So whatever looks good to you.
Okay. Okay, Randy, I've got a hole in my plant.
Oh, well, that's the one I gave you.
Great. Do I fix that?
No, that'll probably work right into your spiral.
All right. Now we're finished. What's the next step?
Okay, well, we're going to take the tape off now. We want that out of our way. And then we're going to go in to the line that we drew with the shears, and we're going to take our pruners and begin to actually cut that foliage away.
Right to the trunk.
Right to the trunk. We want to clear out a hole all the way around the tree.
Oh, so if you make a mistake, you got to make it part of the topiary.
This is when, yeah, this is the moment of truth.
Okay, here we go. Well, you're just like really going to the core.
Right to the core.
Can you kill the plants doing this?
No.
Are you sure? Not too much?
Well, the Alberta spruce is a really hardy plant, and you know, surprisingly, it takes really well to shearing.
Hey, it's coming.
It's looking like a spiral.
It is. Okay, now we just kind of smooth it out.
Right.
You'll want to trim off about a ½ inch from the outer growth to round out your spiral nicely. Grass shears work best for the finishing touches. Okay, stop the clock. How long did it take us?
Well, you know, I'm going to say 12 minutes.
12? I think it's more like 20.3. Okay, what do we need to do to care for this now?
Okay, well, there's two things that you might want to do. One is to think about the top here. You could cut your top off and maintain it at this size, or you could leave the top growing naturally, maybe for another year or two, and continue the spiral.
Okay, so if we need height, let it grow. What about just trimming the outside?
Okay, trimming, you go back to your grass shears. You're going to do that probably just a summer's beginning as the new growth for the season is just hardening off.
Okay.
And you'll shear it about the same depth that we did.
And just once a year.
Once
That's
a year.
it.
Yeah.
Easy.
You bet.
Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
This is great. Get ready. You're about to see a spectacular one-of-a-kind garden with not 100, not 200, but nearly 700 different varieties of hosta. This is Don Dean's shade garden. He's been hooked on hosta for about 10 years now. His collection includes everything from the dwarf varieties to the giant, all colors, all textures, you name it, he's probably got it. Well, now, let me tell you, I'm looking around this garden. You're putting a lot of us gardeners to shame with something like this. You've only been doing this for 10 years.
Correct.
So what do hostas need? The three top things.
I would say a loose, highly organic soil, ample moisture without being soggy, and a little bit of neglect, perhaps.
Oh, neglect.
A little bit of neglect.
Great tip for those of you who don't want to work in the garden. Well, kind of. I would love to learn the names of all the plants you have here, Don. Obviously can't do that, but why don't we start off with some of the ones you've used for the borders?
A fine plant to use in the border would be this little green plant. It's a species called Venusta. It is more readily available than most of the other dwarfs or miniatures. Behind it would be yellow boa, used as a contrast in the border. So I pick up the green with the gold.
Now this is a nice combination. Behind the border you have this beautiful blue-gray hosta. Which one is this?
This is Hosta halcyon. This particular plant puts out a wax coating, and the wax coating is to, I presume, to protect it from the UV light of the sun, protect it from burning. As the season goes on, that gets worn off. And as you can see, if I rub my finger across, I can rub that wax right off, and below there you see the base green color of the leaf.
So this must be a very hardy plant then.
It's a very hardy plant.
Now a lot of the smaller varieties we've seen, they're easy to find, but you've got a rare one called Hot Lips. Where did that one get its name?
If you take a look and pull up the leaf and you take a look at the petiole running down to the base of the plant, it's really a quite bright red color, resembling painted lips.
Now the olive branch is another rare one. Tell me the story behind that one.
Olive branch, if you take a look at it, has a neat maple leaf pattern of a lighter color surrounded by a medium green.
Now there truly are a number of different sizes of hosta. We've got the large one. This is nice and small. Is it definitely not one of the smallest though, is it?
Oh, no.
No. Well, this one's a little smaller. Is that one the smallest?
Not close.
Not close. Well, now wait a minute. This one is very, very small.
That's getting small, but they still are available smaller than that yet.
All right, hang on. We're on the hunt for the smallest hosta. Keep going. I'm looking. Now this one is very small. The tiny tear.
That one is very small. It is one of the smallest.
But it's not the smallest.
It is not the smallest
All right,
yet.
where's the smallest?
Rebecca, this one here would be close to the smallest one available and the smallest that I am growing. This one's named Thumbnail, and as you can see, the leaves are at least no larger than my thumbnail.
That's pretty small.
That is pretty small.
Now, it seems like hosta and slugs go hand in hand. Any varieties that hold up to slugs?
There would be several that would perform better than others. One such hosta would be Love Pat, for example. If you feel that leaf, you can feel how thick it is.
Oh, yeah.
A plant with heavier substance is more resistant to the slugs being able to bite through it with their small teeth.
It seems no matter where you turn in Don's garden, he's got a story to go with each variety of hosta. Whether it's Green Ice, Golden Tiara, Just So, Delta Dawn, Shade Fanfare, On Stage, or Center Stage, it makes you wonder which one's his favorite.
My favorite? Sagai.
Sagai, why?
Why?
Now wait, show me Sagai. I'm looking at, what, how many different varieties here?
Sagai is over here.
This one?
Yep.
The little variegated?
Very large, upright, vase-shaped plant. Good, strong contrast in the variegated pattern to it. And it just plain performs well.
I really like the one next to it. I think of all the ones I've seen, that would be my favorite.
You like Sun Power?
Yeah, really nice.
Excellent, excellent gold. It performs well in heavy shade up to a fair amount of bright light.
Now, of your collection, this is another one of my favorite. What is this one?
That plant's called Niagara Falls.
And it's harder to find.
Well, it hasn't been propagated very much yet, so it's difficult to find, yes.
Where did it get its name?
Well, if you take a look at this leaf, it has this neatly pie-crusted edge to it, plus the way that it drapes out and cascades down, giving that effect of water.
I love it. It's beautiful. And you obviously love it because you're hoping to hybridize this.
I would like to use the pollen on this plant and bring some of these characteristics of this neat pie crust on a large leaf, the deeply impressed veins.
Ooh, can't wait to see that. So what does it take to hybridize a hosta?
Well, actually it takes about 5 seconds to actually do the hybridizing, but then about 5 years to watch the seedling go from germinating up to a mature plant.
Is it something that anybody can do?
Anybody could do it. Pick up a characteristic from the one plant and move that characteristic, blend it in with the characteristics of the second plant.
You blend that with pollen?
Using the pollen and using the egg or ovary of the female pair.
One of the superstars of the shade garden is hosta, and it's the type of plant, really there's no need to go out and buy several of the same plant, because if you learn to divide properly, in a few years you can have dozens. Now the best time to divide hosta is typically in the spring and fall. We're going to start by digging around the outside of the plant. This is called the drip line. We start here because we want to try to get as much of the root ball as we possibly can. Okay, so this is what we end up with. Now you can see each of these petioles here. We could actually divide these, take one petiole, plant it, we'd get another hosta plant. But what we're going to do instead is probably divide this up into 3, 4 different plants. Now there are many different methods. You can just take a sharp knife, serrated knife, and just cut right through the crowns, right through the center of the root system. That will divide it up. But with this type of hosta, we can almost just jiggle this apart. It's the wiggling method. And untangle the roots that way. And look at that, pulls off, we got ourselves a plant. Now before you plant it, you may want to dust the roots with a rooting hormone that has a fungicide mixed in. This will help prevent crown rot. Now planting's the easy part. I've dug a hole and you can see I've got a mound in the center. I'm going to drape the roots over the mound and cover it up with soil, making sure that the soil line is 1 inch above the crown. That's all there is to it. Learn to divide your hosta and soon you'll have lots of hosta. Well, here it is, my custom designed potting bench. Let me show you some of the features. First of all, a lift out top. Below we have potting soil. In the other area, a place for compost. We've got a shelving unit on top, one below, pull-out wire baskets, and the best part, this bench has casters, which means it can be moved easily. Now, this is definitely a potting bench with the features every gardener needs. I'll show you how we put it together, and hopefully by the end of the process, you'll be able to build your own. Now, the first thing you need to do is come up with a design. And if you're not going to be building the potting bench yourself, you need to enlist someone like Steve Haugen, who's a carpenter, who's going to help me out. Now, I've given him a list of all the options I would like to see on my potting bench, and you've come up with a terrific design.
That's right. We have a nice large work surface for you here. We have a couple of bins that one holds the black dirt and one holds the debris. We have lots of shelving above. It's good and sturdy, and some bins below for storage as well.
Looks absolutely fabulous. Okay, now what do we need to do?
Well, now we got to do a little shopping. We have a material list for you.
We, you mean I?
Yeah, you, Rebecca, if you could go buy the materials.
Yeah, sure.
I would love to help you put it together.
Okay, I'll be back.
All right.
Once you get your list, it's a good idea to head out to a shop where you can buy all your materials in just one stop. I'm here at Home Depot. Bill Buck is going to help us select the materials. Obviously, Bill, I need wood. You've got a lot of different types. Which one might be best for this project?
I think for your project, Rebecca, the cedar is going to be great because it's going to hold up well for the outside and getting wet and stuff. Also, too, it stains up real well. It's a real nice wood to use for a bench like you're going to be building.
Okay.
The other thing we could go with is go with green treated wood. That's going to hold up real well outside. It's if you ever had to stain it, it stains up fine too. But I think for the natural, nice look for your bench, we're going to go with this.
Well,
cedar.
then cedar it is. Now, I'm not sure what I need here. Can you explain this?
Well, in the 2x6 cedar, you're going to need 5 8-footers, 5 12-footers, and in the 1x12 cedar, you're going to need 2 8-footers.
Would you mind taking care of that, and I'll get the other materials?
No problem.
Thanks. Okay, let's see. Brass hooks for the... We got some hooks. Well, Bill, looks like I've got everything. Started off with the screws, and I noticed that these had to be galvanized.
Yeah, we went with galvanized because it's going to be outdoors, and being outdoors, the wetness and the rain and everything, they're not going to rust. Also, too, if you went with like sheetrock screws, the black ones, they can stain your wood and they can also rust. So that's a great choice.
We don't want that. And that was the same rule for the bolts. They had to be galvanized.
Galvanized too, so they don't rust. But also, too, if you ever have to take any of it apart, these parts of this that we put this together with, when you take it apart to move it.
That's very good. Now, the potting benches I've had in the past are very hard to move when you get them loaded down. That's why we put casters on these. But these are big casters.
They're big casters, but you know, if you got tools on your bench and the pots on there and stuff, and you ever have to move it, it can be heavy. So by putting, it'll be easier for you to move with the bigger wheels. Also, too, they do swivel, and then we got locking devices on them. So when you're working on it, you can lock the wheels in so it won't move.
Very important. And then we've got the brass hooks for our tools, and then we picked up wood glue. Now, this is not just like a regular glue. This is called weather tight. There's a difference here.
Yeah, you use it for outdoors when you're using it with the moisture and stuff. It's going to seal up real good. Another tip, when you're using it, you want to make sure you wipe it off the wood so it doesn't stain.
And it paints up real well.
Paints up well also.
And then we have our wire baskets. This is for extra tools, and also our rubber baskets to put our soil in. And you got the wood.
I got the wood.
So we're all set to go?
We're all set.
Okay, so don't go away, because when we return, we're going to take this back to the carpenter and we're going to assemble our potting bench. Well, I hope you're ready, because now we're going to start building the potting bench. We're back in Steve Haugen's workshop. I've purchased all the materials. You've got the tools. What do we need to build this?
Just a few simple tools. A drill, it would be nice, and a skill saw or a hand saw. If you're not used to a skill saw, I wouldn't recommend using that.
Okay.
A square and a hammer, and that's safety glasses, of course.
Safety glasses.
Yeah.
Okay, you've got the wood already cut out here. What do we have going on here? Is this the first step?
This is the first step. It's going to be the top of your bench, and we're going to assemble that right now.
Okay, let's do it.
To begin, you'll need 6 pieces of the 2x6 lumber, each cut 6 feet long. The best looking wood should be used for this part, since it will be the top of the bench. Then, using the weatherproof glue, glue all the pieces of wood together. This will create a solid work surface, which I like much better than the open slatted ones.
All right, to ensure we have a good tight fit, Rebecca, we're going to use some clamps on this.
Okay. Okay, this is about as tight as I can get it.
That looks great.
Okay, what's next?
We're going to put the supports onto the top to hold it all together.
Okay, measure them how far in?
They're 4.5 inches from the edge.
Okay.
And they're 30 inches long. And I made a couple marks there for you.
This is where you need the 2.5-inch galvanized screws. They're used to attach the 2 cross supports underneath the top. Just make sure you pre-drill the holes first so you don't split the wood. And to ensure your potting bench is extra sturdy, Steve recommends using 12 screws on each support.
This is a workout. Okay, so we're done with the tabletop. Now what's next?
We're going to let the glue dry, and we're going to build the legs.
Okay, should we move it?
We should move it all the way.
Now the first thing we need to do when building the leg is to build up the base, because obviously this caster isn't going to fit here. So what we're going to do is build it up with blocks of wood. That way it will support the caster.
Each square block of 2x6 wood should be attached with screws to the base of each leg. There are 2 3-foot legs on each side supported by 2 30-inch cross braces. The hex head bolts are used to connect the braces to the legs. For this, you'll need a 5/16-inch drill bit. Once again, drill the holes first so you don't split the wood. Then hammer in each bolt and washer. And don't forget to tighten the nuts until the washers begin to dig into the wood.
Okay, looks like we're done.
They turned out great. Rebecca, this is the shelving we built for the top of your bench. And it has some open storage on top and a couple of shelves for all your goodies.
Oh, this is going to work nicely.
When building the top shelving unit, we use the 1x12 lumber for the back and the 1x6 for creating the sides and the shelves. Now you can position the 2 6-foot shelves wherever you'd like, but just be sure they're secured firmly by drilling screws from the sides and along the back. The 2-inch wide strips on top are also connected with screws, but because they're quite flimsy, we added wood blocks to hold them in place.
Okay, now we've got the major components done.
And the next step is to connect the legs to the top.
Here again, sturdiness is the goal. So first we attach the legs with 3 screws from the side. Then we flipped over the bench, placing 2 more screws through the top in each corner. The last 4 pieces of 2x6 lumber should be cut 6 feet long and used for the bottom shelf. 3 of the pieces need to lay flat on the bottom braces about 1.25 inches apart, and the final piece should be attached as the backboard between the legs.
Okay, that looks good. Now for this next step, we need to cut out 2 holes from the top of the potting bench. You see, I've always wanted easy access to both my potting soil and my compost. So by cutting out the holes, we'll put the garbage cans below. That way I can get to them easily. So I've already marked where I need to cut out. Steve's going to help us make the actual cut.
Ready to start cutting.
All right.
A circular skill saw works best for cutting out the holes, but if you don't have experience using this piece of equipment, you can also use a handsaw. Drilling finger holes in each cutout is the next step. Choose a drill bit that creates a hole big enough to fit 1 finger.
Oh, good job. That's nice. Okay, so we got the holes cut out. I'm hoping or guessing that we're almost done.
We're getting close. Okay. We got to flip the whole thing over again and add some stops so the wood doesn't fall through these tops.
Okay.
And at the same time it's upside down, we can add the casters and add your wire baskets.
Super, let's do it.
The stop should provide a 1/2-inch lip for the cutouts to rest on. They can be made with scrap lumber. Then it's time to add the casters. Center a square block of wood on each leg, and to make sure the casters are firmly in place, attach them with hex head bolts.
Go ahead.
And while your bench is upside down, don't forget to add the wire baskets, which will hang below the bottom shelf.
Oh, the stops work nice. These are great lids, and the casters are a real big plus here. This is a solid piece of furniture.
Now we just have to add the top shelf, and we're all done.
Okay.
While Steve added the final screws to connect the top shelf, I attached the wire hooks for my tools. These screw in easily along the side of the bench. They're perfect for hanging all my garden gadgets.
Corn is one of the most popular vegetables grown in backyard gardens. I mean, who can resist the buttery flavor at the end of the season? And if you've ever had sweet corn, you know what I'm talking about. Once you eat it fresh, you are spoiled for life.
I'm gonna make a mess. Good.
There are basically two families of sweet corn, the super sweet and the sugary enhanced. The super sweet has the highest sugar content and tastes like candy. It's very crisp and it preserves well, whether it's freezing or canning. The only drawback is that you lose that old-fashioned corn flavor, which the sugary enhanced has. And the best part about the sugary enhanced is it's great for the backyard garden because it germinates easily and there's no cross-pollination. In order to get the best tasting sweet corn, you have to harvest when the corn is ready. How do you know? Well, take a look at the silk. It should be dried and brown. Also, one sure test is to puncture one of the kernels. If the liquid that comes out is a milky color, that means the corn is prime. If it's clear, you need to wait for a couple more days. And remember, once you get it picked, you have 48 hours to get it eaten because that's when it tastes best. The challenge is to find the best way to serve your freshly picked corn. And for this section, we've invited our resident chef, Andrew Zimmern, to give us some great ideas. You're already busy at work shucking. What are we making?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm actually leaving the husks intact, and I'm pulling off all of this corn silk. Now, the most important thing, I think, when you're cooking corn is having it be nice and clean, whether you're going to boil it or whether you're going to roast it. If you roast it and you leave the corn silk on, it tends to stick to the kernels and it gets in your teeth. So all I do is I just bind them up like that, and I have all these corn cobs sort of ready to go. The silk has been removed. We're just going to moisten them a little bit. You just roll them in a pan with water. You don't need to soak them. You don't need to get into analysis paralysis over it.
Okay.
And you just throw it onto the grill.
And this is high heat?
Very high heat, about 550 degrees.
How long?
And, well, 10, 12 minutes.
Okay, so that's one way. The next way, which everybody is familiar with, is boiling, but you have a whole new technique.
Well, what's amazing is as many cooks as there are techniques for doing this. I have found one way that works for me, bar none, perfect every time. I get a pan of boiling water.
Okay.
I take my corn.
It's all cleaned.
Nice and clean. I've seasoned the water with a little bit of salt, not sugar.
Okay.
The corn is sweet enough. I drop that in there and I let it go for about 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
That's it. You just let it boil for 30 seconds. Then, after it's boiled, you put the lid on and you turn the heat off. And you let it sit for exactly 10 minutes, no more, no less.
It's perfect.
Perfect every time.
Ooh,
You
I'll
just
have
drain
to
it
try
and
that.
serve.
Really, that's nice. Okay, besides the corn on the cob, you've got something else.
Succotash. When you have a lot of corn, you want to know what to do with it. The best thing to do is to take it off the kernel and saute it. And that's a very, very simple process. All you do is shuck your ears. Make sure you do this outside, right?
Yeah.
Send the kids out into the back porch. And all I want to do is slide my knife right down there and just cut the kernels right off the cob.
Okay, and you're not digging in too deeply.
No, I'm just taking off that outer layer.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll save the cobs later on and make a corn chowder.
Oh yeah, brings in a lot of flavor, plus it thickens up the snips.
Get all that milk and stuff in there.
Okay.
But all we do, put that into a bowl, move this over here to our grill, and we'll use this burner.
Melt some butter over high heat. Add your carrots, onions, and shaved garlic. Now it's time for some fresh marjoram.
Marjoram is just like oregano.
Okay.
But it's got a much more floral smell. Smell the twigs. Isn't that nice?
Yeah, it is nice.
And I just take a few tops of this thyme that I picked from the garden.
Okay. Now add some chopped celery, chili flakes for a little perky flavor, and chopped sweet red pepper, just for some color.
And you see now how all the onions are starting to get glassy. It's time to add our corn.
Okay.
And some of our beautiful peas. Look at that.
Yeah.
Now the corn and peas don't require a lot of cooking, so we just want to saute those just briefly to heat them through. We don't want to overcook them, maybe another minute or two, and then we're done. And all we do to finish this is we add 2 tablespoons of cream, a little bit of salt, a little bit of white pepper.
Ooh. Stir that up, flip a couple of times.
And that is beautiful.
It is pretty.
Succotash, isn't that delightful?
Yes. Now, what would I use this for?
Well, you can serve it as a side dish to anything, but one of the things that I love to do is put a mound in the center of each plate and put a piece of grilled chicken or grilled salmon in the summertime, or a skewer of grilled lamb kebabs.
Oh,
Isn't that amazing?
You are unbelievable.
The vegetables are amazing. I mean, you don't do anything to it. It's just those beautiful garden fresh vegetables.
It tastes like it was just picked off the vine.
Probably because it was.
You did it again. Thank you.
Whew, that was a lot of information. Hope you got all that down, and I want to see those hands. Well, like I said, if you've enjoyed this DVD, be sure to look for the others. I'm Rebecca Coles. Until next time, keep those little hands dirty.
Getting enough water. If it's dry, you need to water more. Now, you may have to do this test a couple of times before you can figure out how often and how much water your garden really needs. One last thing on watering. Make sure you do it in the morning. That way you lose less to evaporation, plus you'll get your plant's roots hydrated and ready to beat the heat of the day. Mulching is a great way to keep the plants cool. Not only will the mulch help the soil retain water, but it also keeps the weeds out. A good layer of mulch should be about 2 to 4 inches thick, and any mulch will do. I prefer to use anything organic, that way in the fall I can turn it into the soil. Another great way for beating the heat in your garden is to select drought-tolerant plants. Some good ideas include yarrow, or if you're looking for a ground cover or a border, how about lamb's ear? And speaking of ground covers, there are numerous sedums that love the hot, dry conditions of summer. Purple coneflower, known as echinacea or gay feather, will sizzle with color under the heat of the sun. Plus, these perennials will give you added color late in the summer into the fall. Some other perennials that hold their own in the dog days of summer include daylilies, the bright and vibrant blanket flower, euphorbia, ornamental grasses, coreopsis, and the king of the prairie, black-eyed Susans. But when in doubt, you can never go wrong with planting species native in your area. Beautiful Santa Fe, New Mexico. Not exactly what you'd call the land of rich organic soil. No, this is the epitome of dry, desolate conditions. With only 8 to 12 inches of rainfall a year, gardening can be a challenge unless you know how to make every drop count. That's what xeriscaping is all about.
The word is not xeriscaping, which is the biggest misconception that people have about dry gardening. And it does not mean planting with gravel and railroad ties and few plants. You can really get a very lush look.
Hi everybody, I'm Rebecca Coles and this is Rebecca's Garden on DVD. We've put together some of the best stories that we've had over the years to bring you this collection of getting started in your garden. Hopefully it's going to help you and inspire you and you'll enjoy getting those hands dirty. And if you like this DVD, you'll like the others that we have in the collection as well, including one on roses, flowers, gardening in the summer, gardening in the fall, and look for our holiday edition. Hope you enjoy the show, and until next time, keep those hands dirty.
The goal for most gardeners is to have flower beds bursting with blooms throughout the summer. But as the temperatures rise into the high 80s and 90s, the summer heat can take its toll on your plants. Too much sun and not enough rain can be the recipe for disaster. The key to preventing your plants from withering with the weather starts with watering. This is definitely not the way to water your plants during the heat of the summer because, believe it or not, a lot of this water will evaporate before it actually gets to the plant's roots, not to mention the fungal diseases that your plant might pick up. The key is to get to the plant's base and water slowly. That way the water has a chance to absorb in the soil and get to the roots. The only problem is, who wants to sit around like this all day trying to water your plants? Well, here's the option. Get yourself a soaker hose. Simply weave this around the plants. The water slowly trickles out, it drains into the soil, and gets to the root of the problem. But it also accomplishes two things. You're going to save 60 to 70% on your water, not to mention that your plant's roots are going to grow deeply, protecting them from the summer sun. Now the big question is, how much water does your garden need? Well, here's a great tip. Simply dig a hole that's about 4 to 6 inches deep. Okay, now you want to take some of the soil from the bottom of the hole. If it feels moist, you know your garden's...
It uses a little bit less water, and if you need an area that's not really going to be played on, it's not a turf grass, but buffalo grass is a lighter green sort of lawn, and it works very well also.
So is xeriscaping a no-maintenance garden?
Definitely not. There's no garden that's really no maintenance unless it's just completely gravel or something. But I think it ends up being very little maintenance. I mean, there's flower deadheading, occasional fertilizing, and really they're pretty self-sufficient gardens.
It seems like just about anywhere you go in the country, you're bound to find someone suffering from a drought. And for a lot of people, that means sacrificing beautiful gardens. But that doesn't have to be the case, especially if you know which plants to grow. Well, here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, we found a nursery that specializes in drought-tolerant plants. Santa Fe, New Mexico is dry. It gets less than 12 inches of rain each year, which might be a hurdle for some of the gardening business, but for David Salmon and his wife Ava, owners of Santa Fe greenhouses in high country, it's pay dirt. They've learned to embrace Mother Nature's dry disposition by offering plants that thrive under the hot, dry desert sun while teaching homeowners the secrets behind water-wise gardening.
A big part of water-wise gardening is using plants that are adapted to tough, difficult garden conditions. And every region has its own peculiarities, has its own difficulties in climate and soil. And so plants that are water-wise are typically well adapted to other difficult conditions as well.
David took me on a tour through his test gardens to show me some of his favorite drought-tolerant plants. Now this is a nice one, the purple ice plant.
We use it a lot here because it blooms all summer, obviously takes extreme heat and sun, and makes a wonderful plant to underplant larger growers like the moonshine yarrow.
Russian sage has got to be one of my favorites. I have it, but for drainage, or was that just something to give some aesthetic beauty here?
Well, it helps us make a little bit of separation between the two rooms, as it were, here. The other thing, the reason that we like raised beds very much is that then we can fill those with soil that has been amended, and it usually has very good drainage, and the plants respond really well.
You amended this, but in the other parts of the yard, do you have to amend the soil well for these kinds of plants?
Definitely. We have very, very poor soil quality here, so we will usually bring in a truckload of some sort of compost material and then use granular fertilizer mixed in with that and till that in a couple of times. And that definitely makes a big difference.
So still the basic rules of planting apply. Amend the soils to make sure the plants get off to a good start.
Yes, very much so.
Next comes the water, what little there is, and that's the key to xeriscaping, getting the water to the root of the plants, which means no overhead sprinkling.
Well, one of the most important things that we do is use a drip irrigation system, and that puts water to each plant. And that's basically set up like this. You have a mainline tube that gets snaked around in the planting areas. We've popped in an emitter, and you run a little tube then to each plant. And that's very important so that you're not wasting water in the dirt in between the plants.
And it goes right to the root zone.
It goes right to the root zone. It's underneath the mulch. It's completely hidden.
Recycling bath water is another popular method of water conservation, especially during drought conditions. A sump pump and a hose will easily transport the water from the tub to the garden. And to keep the water from evaporating, mulching is a must in these dry conditions. Just because we talk about minimal water usage doesn't mean you can't have a beautiful water feature.
Exactly. Fountains are a very important part of our designs in most cases, and we really like to incorporate that because of the sound of the water. It cools the space down, it feels good, it sounds wonderful, and it actually helps humidify the air.
Another element in xeriscaping is limiting the amount of lawn, which is a water hog. Catherine says it's best to plant smaller sections of turf using drought-tolerant grasses.
Here in Santa Fe, if somebody wants a deep green lawn like we're used to in the rest of the country, a Kentucky bluegrass lawn, we try to substitute a fescue blend here, and that is more drought tolerant here. But the idea is to garden smart.
Catherine Clemens knows exactly what it takes to garden smart in the desert. For 20 years, she's worked as a landscape architect in the Southwest, designing all kinds of xeriscape gardens. So how do you get started when you come to a client's house and design a garden for them?
Well, let's take this space for example. When we came here, there was basically just dirt and the existing piñons that were here, which were a huge asset for us. And seeing that, what we did was we decided to break the garden down into smaller spaces, which we typically like to do, spaces that feel a little bit more human in scale. And so we basically break it down into rooms. So we have sort of a living room area, dining room area, and so on here. And this area the client initially wanted to do a lawn in, and we tried to talk him out of that because we figured that a perennial garden like this would end up being more colorful for him and actually give him more than a lawn space would. And one of the things that we really try to focus on is the hardscape, creating a very sound structure in the garden. Then the plants are basically like icing on the cake. It doesn't rely just on the plant material.
What'd you use for the hardscape?
Well, we'll use walls. We use stone walls, fountains certainly. Coyote fencing here is very indigenous material that gives a lot of texture. We like to see garden ornament brought in. Again, that gives full year interest.
Now, having a good plan is the first step to xeriscaping. The next is choosing the right plants, plants that thrive in the hot, dry desert sun. So when it's time for planting, what plants would you recommend in a xeriscape garden?
Well, some of my favorites are in this bed here in front of us. I really love the catmint here. I love the lavender-colored blossoms. It blooms in the spring and then will bloom again in the fall if it's cut back. The centranthus here has gorgeous pink blossoms, and butterflies really love that.
This is Jupiter's beard.
Or Jupiter's beard, yes. In front we have a coreopsis. That variety is the moonbeam coreopsis, just a nice, light, lacy little thing. And you can see that these all knit together really nicely. They flow together, which I really try to do, make a nice tapestry of color in here.
Yeah, and it is. It feels so texturally pleasing. Now, I noticed this is in a raised bed. Was that the purpose?